Hello and welcome, everyone. The night is beautiful, and Halloween is right around the corner. The leaves are changing colors. It's a wonderful time to sit by the fire and read some horror stories to get us all in that nice, spine-chilly mood. And, I'll admit that a normal stream for me doesn't always involve me talking a whole lot, but since I am going to be reading a lot, I may or may not have had some extra preparations put in place, including a nice little mug of tea, so that I can keep my voice from breaking during all this. So, I have received a few story submissions, I found several stories online, and I have even written one myself. And if once we get to that one, please forgive the bad writing. I'm not the best, but I tried. Anyway, I'm going to avoid my usual shtick, where I read some inspiration because we're not here to be inspired, are we? At least, not in the traditional way, where we want to feel good, motivated to do things. No, we want to be scared. We want to be horrified. We want to be inspired to flee in terror. So, without any further ado, let's get right to it. This first one was a story submitted by Undead Commander. It's called A Retail Horror Story. The freakiest thing I dealt with was somebody came in saying they were abused and beaten with a hammer by their stepfather. The person was only wearing a long white t-shirt with no shoes. To add more of this, it was storming outside, and they came in alone. Ahead of them was a nurse that was offering to take them to the hospital, and I noticed that their hand was mangled after they asked to use my personal cell phone. Lucas, welcome to the stream. I gave her the store phone to call her grandmother, apparently, and was saying not to tell her mom or stepdad where she was. She was denying going to the hospital, and only wanted her grandma to pick her up vehemently, and the nurse relented and just left. Good to have you here, Lucas. Oh, something's up. There we go. I told her she can wait at the store for her grandma, and she just wandered out into the rain, walking down the street, crying and arguing with nothing. It freaked me out the rest of my shift. My fiancé and I called the cops about it, and they knew nothing about what was happening. And from what I recall, they never found her. This was actually submitted to me by a other horror YouTuber who I share a Discord server with. I asked their permission to use it, and they said yes. Because here's the thing. A lot of horror stories do not go the way that they do in internet. They don't necessarily have a lot of detail, but they do tend to be very simple. Just things that you can't explain and that you never get closure for. That's probably the most horrific thing we deal with in this life. Alrighty. I probably should have mentioned this early on, but I am starting with the original works, the works that were submitted by various viewers, and I'm probably going to end that with my own work, and then we're going to move on to the internet's horror stories that were submitted to me. Next up is The Badlands. This was submitted by Lucas Sorian, a good friend of mine. I think this is going to be a good story. He told me it involves dinosaurs, and I'm looking forward to that because, other than Jurassic Park, let's be real here, there aren't a whole lot of dinosaur-themed horror stories that I've heard. Alright. In the remote and desolate Badlands of the American Southwest, a team of paleontologists embarked on an expedition that would unearth more than just fossils. Dr. Emily Archer, a brilliant but determined scientist, led the group deep into the heart of a hidden canyon guided by a mysterious map passed down through generations. The map promised the discovery of an entirely new species of dinosaur, a find that could revolutionize the field of paleontology. The journey was treacherous, and the team battled the unforgiving terrain as they ventured further into the canyon. But as they delved deeper, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The very air seemed heavy with dread, and strange occurrences plagued the group. Unearthly whispers echoed through the canyon at night, and bizarre prehistoric calls resounded in the distance. As they reached the heart of the canyon, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Massive footprints, larger than any known dinosaur, led them to an immense cave entrance hidden in the rock. The cave's mouth was an ominous black void, like the gaping maw of some ancient and terrible beast. Dr. Archer's excitement was palpable as they entered the cave, but it quickly turned to unease. The walls bore inscriptions in an indecipherable language, and strange carvings seemed to depict scenes of unfathomable horror. The further they ventured, the more convinced the team became that they were not alone. A sense of foreboding hung in the air. Their fears were realized when deep within the cave, they stumbled upon a massive chamber, the likes of which had never been documented, illuminated by the pale glow of their flashlights. They discovered something both wondrous and horrifying. Enormous fossilized remains lay scattered across the floor, but these were not the fossils they had expected. Instead, they beheld the bones of nightmarish creatures, unlike anything the world has ever seen. These were not ordinary dinosaurs. They were grotesque, twisted monstrosities with sharp, jagged teeth and wickedly curved claws. I'm gonna break for a moment to get a sip of tea. Suddenly the cave trembled, and an otherworldly roar filled the chamber. A creature of unimaginable proportion emerged from the shadows, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. It was an apex predator of an ancient world, a predator so horrifying it had been erased from history. Did I miss? No. The team's flashlights danced over the creature's ghastly form, revealing rows of serrated teeth and claws that could tear through steel. It was a nightmare given flesh, a living relic of a time before time. Terrified and concerned, the paleontologist made a desperate attempt to escape the cave. The creature pursued them relentlessly, its thunderous steps shaking the very foundations of the canyon. As they reached the canyon's entrance, the ground beneath them crumbled, and they tumbled out into the unforgiving desert, narrowly escaping the creature's grasp. Dr. Archer and her team emerged from the canyon forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed. The map had promised scientific glory, and had instead led them to a monstrous secret, buried beneath the earth for eons. The dinosaurs they had discovered were not the awe-inspiring creatures of history, but nightmares that defied the laws of nature. Their tales served as a chilling reminder that some mysteries of the past should remain buried, and that in the darkest corners of the world, unimaginable horrors may yet await discovery. You know, flesh that. And that's why you need to order pizza. Are you saying, Lucas, are you saying that's what you're like when you're hungry? Alright. I do not like how MS Word does not allow me to do dark mode in viewing. Anyway, before we continue, I actually think that story was really good. I think you could flesh that out into a movie. Like, it just needs a little bit of filling on the plot, but you've got a lot going there, because when you think about it, if dinosaurs were around today, that would be terrifying. I actually recall coming across a TikTok sound where it was... Let's see. What some scientists now conjecture that the Tyrannosaurus sounds like I'll be honest, if you heard something like that in the middle of the night, I believe you would be making a very quick stop to the bathroom if you were not running for your life. I'm not going to play it now just because I do not remember where it was. Alright. This next one is the final of the viewer-submitted works. This is one of my own writing, and it may or may not be related to my lore. Maybe not personally my lore, but a little bit of world building. It's called The Change. It is written in the second person. And also, forgive me if it winds up being terrible. Alright. You wake up feeling ill, which is nothing new to you. You've been feeling ill for months, ever since you started working at that company. Then again, these symptoms are why you started working there, isn't it? Ever since you were a kid, you always felt ill near their equipment. The router you had in your home, it seemed to produce a very high-pitched sound coming from it that no one seemed to hear. It gave you headaches and made your skin crawl. Your parents switched internet providers when they noticed it was giving you problems. The memory of it stayed in your mind, to the point where it was almost an obsession. You became determined to figure out what was going on with this company. Why wasn't anyone looking into it? You couldn't understand. Your obsession drew you into getting a degree in investigative journalism, and you decided to become a freelance reporter, selling stories to whatever paper would publish you, which weren't many. You decided to try and make one last report before you gave up journalism for good. You'd expose that company that's been your obsession. You'd find their secrets and lay them bare for the world to see. You decided to publish your findings anonymously on the internet, hoping to protect yourself from any backlash. You would start your investigation by infiltrating their head office in a low-level clerical position and keep your head low, publishing your findings on YouTube and hoping the right people see it. Problem is that you weren't finding anything definitive in the training videos, though you did find some things that seemed rather off. What's worse, your childhood headaches had returned, but now they were even worse. Sometimes they would render you unconscious. It drew attention from management, and sometimes you got an eerie feeling of being followed. Cars that seemed a bit too familiar took similar routes on your drive home. The worst part, though, was the nightmares. They started up as merely waking up in a cold sweat, only vague impressions left in your mind. As time wore on, they increased in frequency, intensity, and detail. You remember seeing strange, four-winged bird-like entities flying around you, circling you like vultures over a fresh corpse. You heard a voice calling you. As your odd illness worsened, you found yourself coughing up blood more than once, and you were in a constant state of nausea while at work. Eventually, you found something big, an old book hidden in your boss's file cabinet. You took it home with you, certain you hadn't been seen. It was an old journal from when the company was founded. A little over a century ago was a small radio station. This was the key to your investigation, the linchpin you were looking for. Your days became a cycle of managing work, reading the journal, and trying to manage your ever-worsening illness. The nausea had thankfully subsided, but nosebleeds were becoming a frequent occurrence, and you were beginning to have trouble focusing. In your nightmares, the bird-like beings circling you seem to be getting closer, and the voice you keep hearing is becoming less terrifying, and you're beginning to understand some of it. But realizing this only makes you uneasy. As you read the journal during your time off, you discover it's a record from a man who emigrated from Britain to escape his psychotic family, and joined the company soon after its founding. But the man eventually defected. All the while, you grew more unwell. Your teeth are beginning to feel loose, and you bleed from the mouth occasionally. You've noticed odd red patches on your body. Sometimes you swear you feel things moving beneath your skin. Your hands feel oddly sore between your middle and ring fingers. They seem further away from each other than they once did. You've been to your doctor multiple times now, and the closest she could tell you was that your symptoms sounded similar to acute radiation syndrome. But you can't seem to remember any time that you could have been exposed to radiation. The record takes a turn when the author became a believer in some cult referred to as the Aftal Algorab that seemed to worship a being called Shamitha, who was also referred to as the Mother of Crows. The heads of this cult were four-winged, raven-like monsters, the journal referred to as the Thelthi. You were offered a promotion to team leader work. You took it, if only to try and find more dark secrets from the company, and the money was nice. Within a week, your symptoms had worsened again. The red patches had come open, weeping souls. There were dark patches on your skin as well. There was a definite divide between your middle and ring fingers now. It went to about the middle of your palm. Had your irises always been yellow? Had your fingernails always looked that sharp? You know you should go to a doctor, but you're worried about her reporting your symptoms to your workplace. You can see the creatures in your nightmares clearly now. Giant, four-winged birds. Their call was loud, their beaks opening like flowers with four petals and sharp teeth, revealing a lipless, sucking orifice like the mouth of a lamprey. 6 eyes staring at you with eerie, yellow light. You managed to pick up some of the words.
Call you and mother.
The record ended abruptly after the author noted he was being followed after leaving the company. He too had been suffering from symptoms like yours, but more minor. You presume the company didn't appreciate someone who knew of their secrets leaving. You had been feeling absolutely horrible for several days now. You're firmly convinced whatever illness you've been having will kill you soon. It's been a week since you finished reading the journal. You're determined to publish the journal on YouTube before you finally succumb to your symptoms. You report into work today, and you hear all sorts of comments from your team. Are you okay? You look terrible. And even a few directly asking you if you had been abusing substances. You sat down at your desk and were about to get to work. You noticed something about the sores in your arm. There were odd black strands poking out of them. When you looked closely, it almost looked like feathers. Being a team lead, you immediately put in for time off and got yourself out of the building as fast as you could without drawing attention. You worked the night shift that day, so it was dark when you arrived at home. You snuck into your house and went to your computer to finish editing the final video to post online before the illness took you. You didn't notice the creaking footsteps on the roof above you. It wasn't until you heard the crash of the roof above you collapsing that you realized the danger of your situation. Before you could act or even look at your attacker, you felt a sharp impact on the back of your head, throwing you to the floor. As you slowly lost consciousness, you see a black, 3-fingered appendage grab you, digits ending in long, black talons. Well, that was my contribution to this. Let's get to some of the better and or worse, depending on your viewpoint, stories here. Some of these are classic creepypastas, others are ones I remember enjoying when I was younger, so I'm going to read them again to see if they still hold any sort of scariness over me. And a couple of SCP entries, just because why not? The first one is actually submission by delayed loading. It's called the Russian Sleep Experiment, and I think this one's fairly well known around the creepypasta community. Let's get right to it. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using experimental gas-based stimulant. So, they gave them hypercaffeine. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stacked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Ah, so this is a gulag. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversation and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected that this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued, attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart and smeared page after page with their own feces and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber
To test the microphones, step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom."
To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond.
"We no longer want to be freed."
Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, pleading, as if pleading for the life of the loved ones to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 test subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state any of them were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips, indicating that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers had initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wound indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, with the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tracts of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives, if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and the arm of one doctor. When the heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point that there was more air in his vascular system than blood, even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the words over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him, to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthesia than normal to put him under. And the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in a struggle not to be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly that they try the surgery without anesthesia. He did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to be still alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple.
Keep coming.
The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthesia as well. although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given.
I must remain awake.
All three subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what would be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but they were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EKG monitor that had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly, having been the first to be wired for an EKG. Most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on papers scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, and then flatlined for the last time, as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat line as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber, with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brain out as well. He pointed the gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you." He screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know!" The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten?"
Have you forgotten so easily?
The subject asked.
We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate in your silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot pray.
The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EKG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out.
So, we free.
I probably should have offered this warning from the get-go, but given the subject matter which we are dealing with, things will be graphic, things will be horrifying. But as per the rules of my little submission form, they will never be explicit. At least sexually explicit. They will, however, be violent. Alright, let's move on to the next tale. This one is an SCP Foundation entry. SCP-3001. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. To prevent further accidental entries into SCP-3001, all Foundation's reality-bending technology will be upgraded/modified with multiple newly developed safeguards to prevent Class C broken entry wormhole creation. While knowledge of SCP-3001 is available to personnel of any level should they wish to learn about it, Research and experimentation with SCP-3001 and its assorted technology is strictly limited to personnel of Level 3 and above, with special clearance designation granted from Sites 120, 121, 124, and 133. SCP Description: SCP-3001 is a hypothesized paradoxical pocket non-dimension accessible through creation of a momentary Class C broken entry wormhole. While believed to be an infinitely extending parallel universe, SCP-3001 is almost completely devoid of any matter and has an extremely low hue level of 0.032, contradicting Ketchel's law of reality with the relation between humes and spacetime. This phenomenon causes matter inside it to decay at an extremely low rate, and damage that would otherwise prove fatal does not impede any biological/electronic function. Simulations suggest an organism can lose more than 70% of their body's tissue and still operate normally, as long as 40% of the brain remains. However, prolonged exposure will cause said matter to gradually approach SCP-3001's own hume level, resulting in severe tissue/structural damage as the matter's own hume field begins to disintegrate. Let me get a sip of something real fast. Like I said, with how much we're reading, it kind of is making my throat sore. Anyway, SCP-3001 was initially discovered on January 2nd, 2000 at Site-120, a facility dedicated to testing and containing reality-bending technology. Dr. Robert Scanton and his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, were head researchers at Site-120 and were developing an experimental device called the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer, or LSS. Dr. Scranton was transported to SCP-3001 after an unexpected seismic activity damaged several active LSS in Site-120 Reality Lab A. Initially presumed dead, Dr. Scranton has survived in SCP-3001 for at least 5 years, 11 months, and 21 days. During this time, he was able to record his experiences and observations within SCP-3001 through a still somehow functioning LSS control panel, which was also brought into SCP-3001 with him through the Class C broken entry wormhole. These recordings were later recovered upon the panel's sudden return, an unexpected side effect of testing improved reality in bending technology. These logs are the basis of SCP-3001's study. Despite new technologies being developed, retrieval and reintegration of Dr. Scranton has been unsuccessful. His current physical and mental states, if he is still alive, are unknown. Transcripts of Dr. Scranton's logs are below. No discernible coherent dialogue can be heard from Dr. Scranton for the first 8 days. He cycles through periods of panic, confusion, and anger throughout. It seems he was attempting to navigate SCP-3001 to find a way out. He finally moved close enough to the recording log on the 11th day, though did not notice it was operating for several more hours. Name: Robert Scranton. Age 39. Birthday September 19th, 1961. Favorite color: blue. Favorite song: Living on a Prayer. Wife: Anna. Name: Robert Scranton. Age 39. Birthday September 19th, 1961. Favorite color: blue. Favorite song: Living on a Prayer. Wife: Anna. She has green eyes. I love her very much. Name: Robert Scranton. Age 39. Birthday September 19th, 1961. Favorite color: blue. Height: 178 centimeters. Weight: 85 kilograms. Wife: Anna. I'm sorry. Name: Robert Scranton. Age 39. Birthday September 19th, 1961. Favorite color: blue. My wife's name is Anna. We got married August 12th, 1991. I hope she got out okay. Please let her be alright. Please let her be alright. Robert Scranton. 39. Anna. Blue. Wife. Please. Please, God. Please. Anna Bobana. Anna Bobana. What the hell is that? It is assumed at this point, Dr. Scranton noticed the flashing light of the recording module. What the fuck? This thing's actually recording. Metal clang heard. Voice is highly agitated and panicked. My name is Robert Scranton. Yeah. My name is Robert Scranton, former researcher at Foundation Site 120. It has been... I don't know, actually. I can't remember. I estimate it's been 10 days, but I can't. Oh god, can anyone hear me? I don't know what has happened. I don't know where I am. And please, is anyone here? Hello? Anyone? Anyone? No one can hear me. Oh god. Oh god. Oh god. And then, lots of swearing. Why the hell is this thing even working? It can't be working. It shouldn't be working. So what the hell? I need to... God, I need to see... How long can I talk here? I think there's a cap or something on the recording log, and I can't see anything. I can only see the red light blinking on and off. I can't see any of the switches next to it. I'm really hungry. Thirsty too. I think I should be dead from dehydration by now, but I don't know. Hi, little red light. Can you talk to me? Can you talk to Anna for me? Hello? I found the controls. 2 weeks, 3 days, 47 hours, and 58 minutes. 2 weeks, 3 days, 47 hours, 58 minutes. 2 weeks, 3 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. 2 weeks, 3 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. Oh, Jesus.
Error with playback. Error with playback. Error with playback.
Wherever the hell I am, I'm pretty sure now that I don't need to eat to stay alive. It hurts a lot. But at this point, I don't think I'm gonna die. So I'm gonna take my time, I guess. Maybe some sort of miracle will happen and I'll get out. Keep dreaming, Robert. Yeah, I'm tired. I'm gonna sleep. 3 weeks, 4 days, 19 hours. I have a picture of Anna in my pocket. I almost forgot. Little red light, let me see your face, please. Just a little bit. I just want to see her for a bit. Hi, Anna. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm coming back, okay? 2 months, 4 days, 3 hours. Hi, Robert here. Yeah, I haven't really recorded much to hear in the past few weeks. Sorry, I gotta keep it together. Breathe. I've been busy trying to learn more about the place I'm in. My prison. My kingdom all my own. King Robert. God, I stink. Is there even air in this goddamn place? Stinky King Robert. King of goddamned nothing. Sorry. I gotta keep this professional. I'll come back when I'm feeling rested. Okay, here goes. My name is Robert Scranton. I'm former head of research site 120, Foundation facility dedicated to studying various reality-bending SCPs for the purpose of developing more advanced countermeasures towards such threats. For the last... Red light, speak to me. 2 months, 8 days, 16 hours. What red light said. I have been trapped in what I believe to be an empty pocket dimension. Alone. Yeah, alone. All alone. I'm calling this place... I don't know, I can't remember where we are, screw it. I don't know what happened in the past. Red light, please, again. 2 months, 8 days, 16 hours. But no one else is around to argue, and at this point, I'm just talking into this control panel to keep myself together. I need to keep a record. There might be some poor bastard in the future who ends up like me. And if this ever actually makes it out, maybe I can help stop that from happening. That's all I have going for me right now. And I really need something to go for. So yeah, Robert Scranton documenting a new SCP for future research purposes. That'll have to do. Here we go. And I'm going to skip through all of these just because I have a feeling it's going to be a lot of repetition. And I get that that's part of the horror, but there is a little bit of a time crunch. 5 years, 9 months, 2 days. Red.
5 years, 9 months, 3 days. 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 5 years, 9 months, 3 days.
The automated message repeats 97 more times. You little shit. I thought you left me. Dr. Scranton's voice is barely audible/coherent, as if through a heavily distorted, muted radio. Sorry to say, Red, but there's not much left here. It's been hard. 142. I've tried to kill myself 184 times. It didn't work. None of them worked. I don't even know how much there is left of me anymore. At least 1 foot, because I can move. Probably a few leg muscles too. But I'm wobbly. Insides are shit. Still a heart, maybe a lung. This place really won't let me stop. Tired. I did die, Red. Come on, Red. Don't look at me like... I don't want your pity. I don't want shock, or anger, or fear, or... I can't when... 224. I'm miscounting. 1, 2, 3, 4... Dr. Scranton counts from 1 to 220, 245 several times over for the next 13 hours. I died. I died a lot. I tried to suffocate. I tried to snap my neck. I tried to bite myself apart. And this place, it's not real. I left. I saw myself on the ground. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave. There's no way to leave. I just floated back down, and each damn time, there was less and less of me. How much more can I take away and still live? So why are you back now? What do you want to tell me?
5 years, 9 months, 12 days.
This place is getting smaller, Red. Did you somehow do this? There's an end here for sure. It's gone from God knows how long to there's like a veil further out. And when I touched it, it hurt like hell. Red, what's going on? It's not dark. That border or whatever is getting brighter, and I mean, it's still dark, but I can actually see something now. What the hell is this? I didn't know I was this bad. There's so much going on.
5 years, 10 months, 10 days.
Red, you're solid, like... No, you're really solid. You're real. And I'm real too only when I touch you, but Red, it really hurts when I do. I think that if I touch you, I might fall apart. You really hurt, Red. Jesus Christ, you hurt. What the hell is going on? About 3 kilometers in radius and closing. Is this something like Kedgel's 4th law? But what the hell is taking it? Hey! I'm in here. Still. I'm in here still. Stop! You're causing a collapse. 2 kilometers. Oh god, what's gonna happen if it closes? Damn it, Red, you hurt. Not collapsing. Waves. They're waves. What? Robert, you're a goddamn genius. Not walls. Windows. Open windows.
5 years, 10 months, 28 days.
Anna, can you hear me? These waves, this place. Okay, imagine 2 realities as 2 pieces of paper stuck together. This place is the space squished between. There should only be 2 realities, parallel. But this place is a tiny but infinite third. Third in between. Like what would happen if you fell into a hole crossing a bridge from point A to point B? Remember Class C wormholes? Those theories about a wormhole that was full of goddamned holes. I think this is where one of those holes leads. It doesn't lead to a different universe. It leads to nothing. A dead end. This place is a dead end. Class C, broken entry. These waves, wherever they're coming from, they're from some parallel reality interacting with this place. Displacing this in-between place ever so slightly. They're all pushing on me in red, because since we still have some level of reality, they're pushing or sucking us towards them, gradually creating a new wormhole towards home. What's gonna happen to me when I go back? When the window closes? Think, damn it, Robert. Think. You've got to think. Think harder. Think harder! Red, I'm gonna have to move away from you. I don't know. You're sick or something. You're really messed up right now. Call me when you're feeling better. I can't think. I can't... Right. Blood. Blood. There's way too much... Drip, drip, drip. Where does it all go? I haven't tasted barf in forever. Not even when I threw up after my you're a man part. Oh god, not again, not again, not again! How can I be throwing up this much, Red? Tell me, I don't... Ugh. I don't even have a stomach to hold it anymore, and the bleeding never stops. Be better now. Thinking straight. Red, I don't know if I'm ready to go back anywhere yet.
5 years, 11 months, 3 days.
No, Red, I'm not being selfish. It wasn't you. It was these goddamn waves coming in. I can't be near them. Red, look at me. See this? Red, look at me. Look! I can't be near them. They'll kill me. I passed the 3 years quite a while back, remember? Because even after all this time, I don't want to die, Red. I'm still scared. Red, I am scared, okay? You wouldn't understand. You're not human, Red. Oh, I'm sorry for offending you, Red. No, Red, come on. I didn't mean it like that. Red, look at me. You're my friend, you get that? You are my best friend. Well, let's face it, you've got a much better chance of getting out of here, Just leave me alone, please, Red. Just for a bit. I'm sorry, okay? I really am. Can you hear the waves coming in, Red? That little humming shake as it hits your ears? I can. It's getting louder every time. And it hurts. It hurts so bad. Another 5 years. 5 more years. If this keeps up, I'm getting restabilized for another 5 goddamned years. Red, what do I do? Over the next 5 days, the control panel does begin to pick up a low-frequency hum that comes in pulses. The volume increases steadily. As it does, Dr. Scranton can be heard screaming, crying, and speaking incoherently in the background. Voice is notably shaky. Red.
5 years, 11 months, 9 days.
Help. A loud splattering noise is heard as something strikes what is assumed to be the control panel. Complete silence for 5 days. Pulse increases in volume, as well as frequency to 30 per minute. Loud splattering noise. Dr. Scranton's voice is extremely slurred, almost incomprehensible. Red. Red, give me your leg. I need support. Red, give me your level arm. Hand. Red, I need to see better. Give me your light. No, sorry, no. No light needed. Got it. Sorry, something else. Anna. I want pretty eyes, Anna. Anna, give me your eye. I only have one. Anna. Anna, give me your lips. I want to kiss you again. Anna, give me your tongue. I'm hungry. Clicks tongue multiple times, breakdowns into a mix of quiet laughter and sobbing. Anna.
Anna Spirito. What? Anna, give me your brain. I only have half.
Humming measured at 56 pulses a minute, sobbing.
I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I'm so scared. I'm sorry. Anna. Anna, can I hold your hand? I lost my ring. It's okay. It's okay. I'll find another way out. There's still enough of me left to... Another 5 years. 5 more years to figure something out. Not yet, please. I know you want to go. I'm not ready yet. I'm not. I'm not. I love you. I love you, Anna.
5 years, 11 months, 20 days.
The hum is now up to 60 pulses per minute. Anna. Dr. Scranton's speech pattern is almost regular. A loud metallic bang is heard, followed by a splattering noise, as something strikes the control panel once again.
5 years, 11 months, 21 days.
On December 2005, the LSS control panel spontaneously appeared back within Site-120 testing facility, Reality Lab A. Doctor, initial hume field readings on the anchor are stable. Output readings are 2.3 with a 0.001% fluctuation. Good, Skinner. Let's hope that holds. Hold on. What the hell? What's wrong? Something has appeared inside the testing zone. What? Ma'am, a large object has materialized within the anchor field. What's the call? Kill the power? Call in the team? Skinner? What the hell are you? Oh my god. Where the hell did that thing come from? I don't know, ma'am. It just appeared out of nowhere. It looks like it's covered in... What the hell is that? Oh god, it smells awful. I can smell it from here. It smells like death. It's like vomit and blood and... Ma'am? Oh my god. Ma'am? Do not abort, Skinner. I repeat, do not abort. Keep that field up and do not abort. Ma'am, what's going on? Ma'am? Ma'am! Reduce hume field to 1.7. I'm entering the containment zone. Do not disengage the field or we risk destabilizing the object. Yes ma'am. Mechanical whirring is heard. Reporting, yes. This is Dr. Matthew Skinner requesting... Splashing footsteps are heard. Oh god, what the hell? What the hell is all this? This is the... Robert? Robert, is that you? Oh god, please, no. Don't let it be you. Don't let it be you, Robert. I thought... How can this thing be? Splashing footsteps heard again. Electronic beeping. Ma'am. Ma'am, what are you doing? You shouldn't touch... This is the Lang String...
This is the Lang String Stabilizer Interface. Welcome back, Dr. Lang. What would you like to?
Access audio log playback starting from January 2nd, 2000. Squishing noise heard. Oh god, what the hell happened to this thing? It's like someone exploded on it. It's like... Please, no, no, no. It's Ray. Is Ray. Where's the other?
Accessing audio files. Please verbally state your password to continue, Dr. Lang.
Voice begins to break. Password. Password is Anna Bobana. Oh my god, it's everywhere. What the hell?
Request acknowledged. Processing. I'm sorry. There are no audio logs for January 2nd, 2000. Dr. Scranton accessed log on January 13th, 2000 via voice recognition at that time. Play it back now, damn it. Play it back. Oh god, Robert. Robert, sweetie, what happened to... Confirmed. Dr. Lang, retrieving audio files.
Ma'am, you really shouldn't be touching that barehanded. It could be hazardous. You should wait for the cleaning team to... There's so much blood here. There's so much... Honey, are you okay? Where'd you go? Oh god. Sound splattering and squeaking, as if wiping away fluid. Oh god, there's so much blood. What? Oh my... Then silence for 20 seconds. Ma'am, Dr. Lang, please step away from that... His hand, his ring, it just fell to the... Ma'am, what? Oh, shit. Oh, Jesus Christ. Dr. Lang, please step away and come back. We'll get you out of here now. Everything will be alright.
Files retrieved. Dr. Lang, playing now.
Dr. Lang, please come with me. We'll get help. You hear me? Dr. Lang? Dr. Lang, can you hear me? Dr. Lang!
Name, Robert Scranton. Age 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna.
Thudding sound heard, as if falling on wet pavement. Dr. Lang. Dr. Lang! Report this to Dr. Matthew Skinner, reporting from Site 120 Reality Lab. I need medical attention here immediately. Well, that was definitely an interesting take, and also a... Oh, I think I went a bit longer than I intended to with that one. A lot of repetition. It was kind of like a Groundhog Day loop. Basically, from what I gather, this one works as basically a pocket dimension where you can't die while you're there, but if you harm yourself there while in that reality, and you come back to normal reality, you die. Very, very interesting concept. Alright. A lot of these are going to be coming from Creepypasta.com, a repository of internet horror stories that was suggested to me by Mort the Macabre. And if he is here, I don't know if he is, I thank you for the tip, and I think that will allow me, it's what's going to allow me to have enough stories to read on the stream. Creepypasta presents Homecoming, written by Michael Fumia. That night, Oscar Strid returned home, after having been missing for almost a decade. It was not a celebratory one. His father had answered the door when Oscar knocked, then stood and stared at his son in silent disbelief. 3 years earlier, the boy had been declared legally dead, yet there he stood, looking exactly as he had when he had disappeared. In fact, he had not aged a day, which was particularly perplexing as Oscar had gone missing when he was 11 years old. Mary Strid, the boy's mother, and wife of Mads, had taken the boy to the Dulcet County Fair and vanished along with him 10 years prior. When Oscar and Maria were lost to fate or foul play, Hannah, Mads and Maria's younger daughter, had been running a fever, so Mads stayed home with the 6-year-old. Since their first trip to the fair on Oscar's 5th birthday, the boy looked forward to it every year. On his 11th birthday, Maria put her worry for her daughter aside and kept with tradition. Mads, who never really enjoyed things like fairs, was happy to stay home with Hannah. Is it Hannah or Henna? I'm not sure. I'm going to say Hannah for now. He was never comfortable in a crowd. Besides, other patrons were rude, the barkers were obnoxious, and everything was far too bright, loud, and overpriced. Maria loved the fair. The lights, and the smells enthralled her. She played every game, rode every ride, and she felt blessed that her son had loved the fair as much as she. When they left that evening, they were giddy, as they co-conspired to enjoy it more than ever. Their good time will not be indelibly tarnished by Mad's grumpiness and discomfort. It was an opportunity for them to create a memory that could belong to just her and her son. Mads loved watching the whispering and giggling that mother and son engaged in the entire day. At dinner, he watched his son look out the window every few minutes, as tradition demanded that they not leave the house until sundown, so that they could take in the multicolored spectacle of the fairway lights from the top of the hill on Union Street. When they turned in the driveway to wave goodbye to Mads, he marveled at the way that Oscar's hair, so blonde it was almost white, captured the light of the setting sun and created the illusion of an orange-yellow halo around his face. His gaze shifted to Maria. She smiled faintly and then turned away. Then they left. They never returned, until Oscar appeared on the porch. "Hi, Mads." The boy broke the silence. It had been 10 years, but Mads knew the voice to be Oscar's. Almost. "Oscar? How? Where? What happened?" His father could not formulate a proper question as wave after wave of emotion flooded his brain and weakened his resolve. Falling to his knees, Mads looked directly into his son's eyes. He reached out to grasp his arms. Oscar flinched only slightly. "I don't understand." It was all he could think of saying. "It's kinda hard to explain," said the boy. "Not so hard to tell, it'll just be hard for you to hear. How are you? If you let me in, I can explain." "Of course, come in," Mads said, almost formally, springing to his feet and stepping back to allow his impossibly young son into the house. Down and get a step again. Reading all this once is not the best feeling in the throat. The boy looked around. His father looked at his face for signs of happiness, or at least nostalgia. What he saw was observation, cold and clinical. Oscar's eyes moved from the surface to wall and back again. There was no warmth in his perusal of his former home. The boy was just reacquainting himself with the surroundings. Curiosity standing in for nostalgia. "I remember." The boy allowed the sentence to dissolve into the ether. With those two words, Mads realized what was different in his son's voice. There was no youth in it. There wasn't joy or love. There was no sense of wonder. It was the voice, though still pitched appropriately to his stature, of someone much older. It was the voice of the road-weary. Mads heard the same tone every time someone broke down while driving across the country, and had just pushed their equally weird car into the parking lot of his garage, conveniently located just off of Route 48. "Your mother?" was all that Mads could manage. "She'll be here." He offered no more information than that, and Mads was certain he could not glean any further knowledge, were he to press on. The boy moved to the sofa and took a seat. His father was moved by the fact that the boy took the same place on the sofa that he had laid claim to for the family's Saturday movie nights, a tradition that was established when Oscar was old enough to sit up by himself. By this time, shock had made way for curiosity, and more pressing, doubt. It was impossible that his son had remained unchanged all these years. It would have been one thing if he disappeared when he was 20 and returned at 30, similar enough to be almost unchanged. There was no realistic explanation for a child to pass 10 years without aging a day. Taking command of reason, he thought, no, obviously this boy was an imposter. Someone was playing a terrible prank on him. Or maybe someone wanted to extort money from him by finding a boy who looked remarkably like his son to conspire against him. But he had nothing. He owned the auto repair shop in town, and he only owned half of that. His brother was the co-owner, and they were making a good enough living, but hardly enough to exact such a terrible and complex plan. Mads began to examine the boy who claimed to be Oscar in close detail. While the imposter's eyes continued to drink in the contents of the living room, Matt allowed his eyes to take inventory of the boy's appearance. His hair was longer and shaggier than they kept it. It looked darker than he remembered. But it also looked dirty, which would explain the variation. There were scars on his hand and face that were not reflected in his recollection of Oscar. He wished that fake Oscar would smile so that he could examine his teeth. His son had a tooth, bottom front, which was set back behind the rest of the row. It was the only imperfection in an otherwise perfect smile. This boy was thinner than his son as well. Oscar was a skinny kid to begin with, but this boy looked frail. Then there were the eyes. They were the same icy blue that he remembered, but they were lightless and cold. When you're done trying to convince yourself that it's me, I can prove that I'm Oscar. How? The boy lifted his shirt, showing a scar that would indicate he had surgery in the past. Remember the night my appendix burst? Mads nodded involuntarily. Remember how I had to have 2 more surgeries after to clean the infected fluids from my gut? Remember when I told you that I was running away and you warmed up mashed potatoes and asked me why? Do you remember what I said? You said you didn't know. You were just sad. Imposter Oscar let go of his shirt, and it returned to hanging loosely on his raw-boned chest and continued. Vinny died. We buried him in the woods. You said dogs evolved from wolves, and that dogs' heaven was probably a forest where they could run free. Remember the time I caught you smoking a cigarette out back and you begged me not to tell Mom? Remember that you let me pick the movie that Saturday and I picked Steel Magnolias? I picked it because it was her favorite and you hated it. I was so angry that you lied to her. I was even angrier that you made me lie to her. The boy narrowed his eyes and paused. He looked at Mads and grinned with what seemed like malice. Remember when I was 6 and I walked in on you and Mom? Mom made you talk to me because I couldn't stop crying. I thought you were hurting her. You're going to skip this part. Enough! There was an edge of anger in Mads' voice, as the shock wore off, replaced by disgust for the obvious imposter. Who are you and how do you know so much about my family? It's me, Mads. Stop calling me Mads! It came as a quivering shout. My son would call me Dad. After all this time, you still expect to be a father to me? Imposter Oscar smiled up at Mads. It was a smile that was devoid of love, or any feeling at all. I never stopped being your father. I was always your father. I'm still your dad. He stared down at the boy. There was no indication that this boy cared about him. This version of Oscar was dead in the eyes, but a sudden spark gave Mads hope. The boy's eyes broke away from the man's stare. They focused on a photo of Maria and Oscar that was on the mantel, in the same spot it had been since the day after the disappearance. The photo was taken the day Oscar turned 11. It was the most recent photo he had of them. He took it himself, just before the boy and his mother left for the fair. Anna was still bedsick, so the photo was just the 2 of them. That very picture appeared in every newspaper in the state. The police had asked for a recent photo. He took out his phone and airdropped it to the female officer who was present. The same officer returned to his home the next day. She had printed a copy of the photo and framed it for him. She apologized, thinking he might not like the frame. She held him while he cried, clutching the gift to his chest. There were so many times the associations of that photo with the search for his missing wife and son made Mads want to take it off the mantel and hide it somewhere to bury it, even somewhere he might rediscover it again, in his elder years, and possibly be able to look at it again without pain and loss. But he kept that photo right where it was, because it was the one used in the search, and that translated as hope. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he believed that people were still looking for the boy in the photo, but not the boy standing before him now who was staring at his father with concern. When Mads looked up to meet Oscar's eyes, the boy's eyes softened. Mads could not be sure but he was convinced the look, among what seemed a cacophony of emotions, contained love. A sudden creak of old dry wood startled them both. They turned their heads towards the stairs as Hannah descended. Her face was a mask of indifference that became recognition, then joy. She bolted down the remaining steps and ran to her brother, embracing him tightly. After a moment, she pushed him back. "Where were you?" How are you still? She trailed off, as the last delusion fed by sleepiness faded, letting her hands fall to her side. Hannah crouched down and leaned her now 16-year-old face until it was just a couple of inches away from her brother's voice. Her voice barely whispered, she asked, "Where's Mom?" "She's coming, apparently," Mads said. The children looked at each other with great interest. He marveled at the young adult, who was only 6 years old when he disappeared, and her at the boy who should be a young man. It was the first time that the boy had shown any connection to anything in the house since his arrival. Reaching up, Oscar placed his open palm upon her cheek. Hannah tilted her head into the warmth of her younger brother's hand. "You grew up," was all that Oscar said. If Matt was unsure that he had seen the capacity for paternal love in his son's eyes, he was certain that there was love for his little sister in Oscar's voice. "Without you," Hannah mumbled sorrowfully. Then anger crossed her face, and she became indignant, swiping his hand away as she yelled, "You're not Oscar! That's impossible! Where's my brother, and who the are you?" "Language," Matt said mechanically. The boy that represented the improbable return of her older brother smiled. It was the first time he had since entering the house. Mads immediately recognized the recessed tooth on the bottom right row of his teeth, slightly darker than the rest. "It's Oscar," was all that the man could manage. "That's not possible, Daddy." Mads took notice of the fact that Hannah was now crying, and moved across the room to put his arm around her shoulders. "Sweetie, I can't explain it, but I do believe it's him. It is me. We'll explain it all," said Oscar, still smiling. "Who's we?" Hannah spit out between what were now sobs. "Mom's here," the boy said, stone-faced again. "It's a good thing I kept my key," said Maria, emerging from the kitchen, where Mads was stunned by the minimal difference in appearance of his son as compared to the son he lost. He was devastated by the woman who was striding up to him. Alright, skipping that. I could have sworn this one didn't have stuff like that. Maria, that now stood in front of him, looked frail, like the boy, with long tresses and a hardness in her look so would scare off any flirtatious shopper in the local market. He noticed the scars on her hands as well, the backs of which were myriad in bone and sinew just under the skin. He realized she was not frail at all, in fact. Her hands belied great strength. Mads imagined that, were he able to see her bare arms and legs, that she would look like her skin was simply wrapped tightly around taut muscle and bone, though she looked no older than the day she left. He thought she looked haggard, as if the last 10 years had been a struggle. Then it sank in. They looked like junkies. "You don't look happy to see me," Maria said, coldly teasing. "We missed you. We came back." "I just want an explanation. Are you on drugs?" said Mad, now sounding weary himself. "No. Sort of, if only." Maria let those words hang in the air for a moment, then said, "There's no rehab for what we are." Hannah turned and looked at her daughter. "Hannah, honey, it really is Mommy," she cooed, moving towards Hannah, lifting her arms in an attempt to embrace. Hannah stepped back and moved left, taking a place behind her father. "Oh, Hannah, we'll explain everything. We'll be a family again, I promise." Mads took half a step back from the woman he believed might actually be his wife. Oscar was still holding the photograph of his family, and held it up for his mother to see. Maria's face softened, almost imperceptibly, and only for a moment. She then turned back to Mads. "There's a story, an explanation. You're not going to believe it," she paused. "But that's okay. You don't need to understand." She took a step back and looked at her daughter again. "You're so beautiful, so grown up. You'll have a much easier time than your brother, fortunately." Oh my god. Maybe it's just because I've been reading for a while now, but I'm just like, please get to the end here. Mads looked at Hannah, and then at his wife. The last thing Maria said had foreboding in it, but he could not suss the meaning of the words. Teenage Hannah looked remarkably like the Maria who had gone missing, but the skeletal specter that gazed at his daughter hungrily was as different from the woman as he could imagine. He knew it was really her. but he wished he didn't believe that. He watched her look at him, then turn away, coldly dismissing him. She cocked her head slightly. "He's coming," was all that she... "Who's he?" Then she slowly sat on the sofa. Mads could not help but be moved by the fact that Maria slid down on the far end of the sofa, her reserved spot for the family on movie nights with Oscar. The boy moved suddenly, making Mads and Hannah flinch. Oscar held his hand open, palmed at shoulder height, and shrugged, an insincere apology. He placed the frame back at its assigned place, made obvious by a long rectangular absence of dust on the mantelshelf. Faintly, the sound of a motorcycle approaching disturbed the air in the room. It was still far off. He wondered how Maria might have heard that a full minute before he did, especially considering the sound was so familiar. Unsurprisingly, the motorcycle pulled into a driveway, and a moment later fell silent. He recognized the slow gait of his brother. Mads was 3 years his junior, and he loved his big brother fiercely and unconditionally. When Mads was 18 months old, brother was the first word he was able to say. So tickled were their parents that brother became his only sibling's nickname, and Mads always took a second to recollect his brother's real name whenever asked. So much for the ferocity of his love. His love for brother proved to be unconditional when, after a 3-year stint in prison for aggravated assault, Mads put down payment on the garage and brought brother in as his partner. Brother was a kind and gentle man, but he was tough when he needed to be, and did not start the fight that landed him in prison, but he won it. He was walked into the police station while the man who started the fight was transported to the hospital. The aggressor appeared in court in a wheelchair and was crying, with his crying wife and equally grief-stricken brood in tow. Brother was unmarried. In fact, he had a reputation as a womanizer. He was unemployed then, freelancing as a handyman. He enjoyed a drink and rode a motorcycle. Just the kind of stereotypes that small-town judges base their decision on. Brother appeared in the doorway. He opened his mouth to speak, but when his eyes landed on Maria, he fell silent. After a moment, his face split in a huge grin, and he charged in the room and embraced his sister-in-law. "Holy shit, girl, where have you been?" he yelled. His hug loosened, and he held her at arm's length, looking into his face. His expression melted into one of both despair and confusion. "What the hell happened to you? You look like 40 miles of rough road." Mads knew that brother dated Maria long before he married her. The two were in high school sweethearts, singing together, and their reaction to each other, he could not help but wonder if the affair had ever ended. It's a long, strange story, but soon we'll have all the time in the... Oh my gosh. How many times are they just gonna keep just yanking? It's like, get to the explanation. Like, I get it's foreshadowing, but it's kind of dragging a bit long at this point. Oscar quickly shifted to the space behind his uncle, grabbing brother's arms. He pulled them behind his back until the man's elbows were touching. Brother tried to wriggle out of the boy's grip, but found it impossible. Oscar shifted his weight slightly, and his uncle was on his knees in front of Maria. She touched her waist. With a simple flip of her finger and a small tug, she produced a short, white blade that was masquerading as a belt buckle. Without ceremony and with a hint of smile on her face, she punched the blade into brother's neck. A second later, she pulled the knife out. The first jet of blood that exploded from the wound soaked the front of her husband's jeans, and the face of her daughter, who was still mostly hiding behind her father. Mariah dropped to her knees before another gout of blood could be lost. She wrapped her arms around brother's neck, holding him still, and planted her mouth over the wound. Brother pleaded with her to stop. When he began to weaken, his demeanor turned to anger, ordering her to stop and threatening her. Shortly thereafter, acquiescence led to tears as he sobbed softly before falling silent. For a few moments, the only sound anyone in the room could hear was her gulping the last of what his body offered willingly. When she started loudly sucking the last drops from the brother's corpse, she was startled by screaming. "Mommy!" Hannah wailed in torment. The scream snapped Mads out of the trance-like state he had been in since his wife and boy appeared. He bolted forward and grabbed Maria by her upper arm and tried to yank her to her feet. Oscar dropped his uncle's body and was beginning to stand, while his balance was momentarily compromised. Mads punched his son in the chest. The boy's feet flew out from under him as he flipped off his feet, landing with a loud thud on his back. Maria stood, unhindered by her husband's grasp on her arm, and gripped his forearm with her free hand. She clamped down on Mads' face. As she clamped down, Mads' face twisted in pain and fear. "I will take it off at the fucking elbow," she said. Her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact. Her face betrayed no emotion. There was neither hate nor malice in her voice. He was suddenly sure she was willing and capable of acting on that promise. Hannah remained in the room, crying and muttering. It took Mariah a moment to realize her daughter was praying. "Oh, sweetie, that shit won't do any good." Hannah had been dating Jimmy Conway, son of Big Jane Conway, who owned the town's only movie house. Jimmy was an avid horror movie fan. Hannah was not, but she watched every horror movie he suggested they watch together, albeit between the fingers of her hand that were always shielding her face from the atrocities on screen. She watched them because she loved them in that desperate way that 16-year-olds love each other, and she had seen enough of them to know where the story playing out in the family living room was going, and what to do about it. Reaching into the top of her nightgown, Hannah presented a small, ornate gold crucifix at the end of a delicate gold chain. It was given to her by Brother, her godfather, on the day of her christening. Maria looked at it blankly for a moment, then smiled. In a swift motion, Maria reached out and grabbed the cross. So sudden was her motion that Hannah leapt back with a yelp, snapping the thin chain. Maria gently freed the cross from the broken chain, opened her mouth, and placed the cross on her tongue. She let it sit there long enough for Hannah to register that the symbol of her faith had no effect on the monster that was once her mother. Then Maria closed her mouth and swallowed. Hannah screamed and bolted across the living room and upstairs towards her room. "Get your sister, Oscar," Maria said, then turned her attention back to Mads. Mads watched the boy charge up the stairs behind her sister. He heard the sounds of her door being knocked on, then pounded on, then broken out of its frame. Hannah screamed. "What the hell's going on, Maria? What are you doing? Why?" Mads pleaded, unable to escape her grasp and save his only daughter, and knowing the words sounded childish and desperate, but unable to conjure anything more effective. "How? Our daughter? What happened to you two?" "Oh, Mads," she began. 10 years ago we went to the fair. You let us go. Alone. Unprotected. We had so much fun. It was the first year that Oscar was tall enough to ride all the rides. When we were walking home, he said it was the best birthday he ever had. That was about the last thing he said before." Maria's eyes drifted, and her words ended with an audible exhalation. "Before what?" Matt said, trying to sound stalwart. "Before we came home. You never came home. Not this home. We were alone. You didn't protect us. You couldn't have protected us if you wanted to, but at least we wouldn't have been alone. You killed Brother. Please don't let Oscar kill Hannah. Brother is coming home. Don't you worry." She paused, then continued, her voice exposing the pain of the memory. "We were attacked on our way home." "By who?" "It doesn't matter," Maria said edgily. "Look, a guy like me attacked us. He made us like him. He killed us, then he brought us home. It's not at all like the movies, you know. We didn't have to drink his blood to become like him. It doesn't work that way. To make someone like me, all I have to do is take everything." She gestured at Brother. "Then leave a little something behind. You'll see. Brother is coming real soon." "How can you—" It was hard at first. I didn't want to have to kill anybody, but first you learn it. We can eat real food, you know. Not just the blood. We can walk around in the daylight, but your looks change. I could see in your face you noticed the moment you saw me. In the dark, we don't look so out of place. Do you still love us? Why'd you come home? It would have been better to think you're dead than know you're monsters." Mads was angry now. "You know what doesn't die when you become monsters like us? That doesn't die. 10 years was too long to be without my family, so I've come to bring them home." "I won't go with you. I never want to be like you. I ain't gonna let you have Hannah either, Mads spit. I didn't come for you, Mads. Her statement was punctuated by the sound of Hannah screaming. One long, continuous scream. Mads struggled even though he knew he could not best the ghoul that held him fast. The scream lasted for minutes, but to Mads, his daughter's agony seemed to last for days. Then it drifted away along with her life. Her father knew. Then another sound, closer to him, snatched his attention away. It was Brother. He was writhing and gasping for air. He started coughing. Then he stopped. After a moment, Brother sat up and stared at the brother couple, perplexed. Ah, you're home. What do you mean you didn't come for me? You can't just take Hannah away, you have Oscar. Please let her stay here with me, Mads pleaded, tears appearing on his cheeks. Mads, you're a good man, but I never loved you really. Brother was my first love, my only love. Always since we were kids. I married you because he couldn't marry me. You were my shitty booby prize at the fair. She looked at him with a genuine care for the first time since she returned. I'm sorry, you weren't shitty. You just weren't the prize I wanted, she said, releasing him from her grasp. Mads turned towards Brother and held out a hand. Brother took Mads' hand and allowed himself to be hoisted to her feet. Brother swayed a bit, then fell backwards onto the couch. He prophetically landed in Mads' movie night seat. A creak from the staircase stole everyone's attention. Oscar was slowly descending. His lips, cheeks, and chin spattered with gore. In his arms, he was cradling his big little sister. She was dead. A large red stain on the front of her pink nightgown that drove the realization home. Mads wondered how long it would take her to come home, like Brother. Kill me. I can't live like this. And I can't kill you. You may only be my husband on paper, but you are the father of my children. I came to get Hannah and Brother. Killing you was never part of the plan. There's a lot you don't understand, and I'll tell you, love doesn't die. In fact, it becomes overwhelmingly selfish and intense. I need him. I need my kids. I'll take care of them. I know you think we're monsters, but we're not, Oscar offered. We'll come visit Daddy, I swear. That promise made, Hannah began to stir. Why did you wait 10 years? Mads asked. I couldn't come back as I am. I knew that if I did, I couldn't leave without Brother or Hannah. And I couldn't hurt you like that again. And I can't kill you. Love in my world is monstrous, selfish, and what happened? I'll explain in the car, sweetie. Oh yeah, we're taking the car. All four of us aren't going to fit on Brother's bike. She turned to Brother, saying, P.S. You're not my brother, so you'll be Eric from now on. Just like your mama named you. She turned to her children. Kiss your daddy goodbye, kids. Oscar and Hannah obeyed. Hannah was still warm, only recently deceased. Oscar's kiss was a cold touch. Mads touched his cheek where Oscar's lips rested briefly, unconvinced that the place on which Oscar's kiss landed would ever feel warm again. The four moved towards the door. Brother followed the other three. He stopped in the doorway, after the other three disappeared from view, then turned. I loved you, Mads. And then he was gone. Mads stood stunned for a moment. Becoming lightheaded, he moved to the couch to sit down. Deciding he could never sit on the couch again, he walked into the kitchen to take his usual place at the table. His options played over and over in his mind. He could report the car stolen. The police wouldn't know what they had in store. They wouldn't be prepared for it. He didn't even know if guns could stop them. Besides, he figured, they would ditch the car at their first opportunity. He could kill himself. He didn't really have a reason to live. He also didn't have the guts to put a gun to his temple and pull the trigger. Or he could wait. They would be back. They promised. And he would be waiting. If they wait another 10 years, he would have plenty of time to figure out how to kill them for good. He hoped. Okay. That story ran way too... I personally, I'm not normally one to judge writing, but I'll admit this one ran a little bit too long. Like, they kind of took a little bit too long to answer the question of what was going on, even though it was kind of a little bit obvious. It was just like, that'll be explained when she comes. She comes, it's not explained. When he comes. Not explained who he is until a moment later. I personally feel like at least that might have been better stated at the beginning? I don't know, it's a good story, at least in concept. I personally did not care for that one. Alright, which one should we read next? You know what? Let's switch to a horror story that I remember reading in my teenage years that scared me, but probably won't now. And this one is in a vein of creepypastas that have been long discredited at this point. This is a video game creepypasta called Easter Egg Snow on Mount Silver. And yes, it is a Pokemon one. So, will it be terrible? Potentially. But I remember reading a warning about Pokemon creepypastas not being allowed on the wiki anymore. And that was just because there were so many of them. And I get part of it's just because, like, when you read the Pokemon entries from the games, they get super dark compared with the rest of the series. Alright. And I know this is technically not where I have things, but I need a bit of a palate cleanser. Easter Egg. Snow on Mount Silver. So my brother and I, we kind of grew up on Pokemon. Around here, a lot of kids did. It worked out perfectly for us, too. Every time a new gen came out, one of us would get one version, one of us would get the other. And since our mom liked to spoil us, we both got the third one. This is going to sound, at first, like a bittersweet story about two siblings who grow up with a couple of games that eventually take them down two different roads. Well, it's a little more than that. Couple of games that eventually take them down two different... I've never had a game take me down a different road. The years rolled by, we kept collecting. Game Boys got old, we replaced them. Cartridges finally gave out, we picked up new copies. But we stared down two completely different roads before Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald came out. See, around then, my brother got a Game Shark. We had heard all the hacks and cheats you could do with them, even if we were kind of late to the party, and they sounded awfully cool. Our first guinea pig cartridge was my brother's old blue version. We just dicked around with it a little bit, nothing major. But whatever we did, fucked the cartridge up. After just a couple of code entries, it glitched out completely and became unplayable. Naturally, we were upset at first. My brother mourned the loss of his hours of work. And I was sympathetic. I told him, "It's okay, we can replace it, I guess. Stupid Shark was a waste of money." But here our paths finally differed. After seeing the mess it had turned blue version into, I had become opposed to the idea of hacking or cheating any of my games. What can I say? I'm a chick. I feel the feelings for the little pixel critters. I feel like that line was a little unnecessary. At least with that Game Shark. But my brother had taken his game's destruction as a personal challenge or something. I don't think he ever played a game after that which wasn't hacked somehow. Yeah, we played a shit ton of Pokemon, man. But for us, there really wasn't much else to do. We lived out in the country without many other kids, and the farmers didn't want us on their property, so we played Pokemon out on the lawn just about all day, every day. It was pretty awesome for us, at least. We lost the Game Shark when our rooms got moved around. A new addition was built onto our house, and it disappeared in the mess of shit that got stuffed into the new closet. So, bit of a contradiction there. They mention a lot of kids around them did, and then suddenly there's no other kids around? It's a little odd. Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald arrived, and after playing through them, once we were both in agreement that they were definitely lacking in comparison to the last gen. We both tried another honest playthrough, and though we managed to finish, it left us both yearning for some good old-fashioned nostalgia. Where were our gold, silver, and crystal cartridges, though? It took us probably a month to dig through the boxes we'd been too lazy to open up before. But we finally found one full of a shitload of all our old electronics. My old purple Game Boy Color still worked. His red one could no longer hold the batteries in place. I sympathize with that. I had an old Game Boy Color once, and me, being the child that I was at the time, broke one of the springs that hold the batteries in place. I fixed it with a paperclip. Both of our Game Boy Advances were fine though, along with our snake lights, the link cables, that one with the nifty little connector in the middle that I had always wrapped up oh so carefully to avoid fraying the wires and condemning it to the trash like our last cable. That's phone cables for me. We both grabbed up everything we could. It was so nice to have yellow, which had been my first and most cherished game of any series, not just Pokemon, and red and gold back. Hold up. You said you both got the first game, the two different versions, and then you both got the third. It's fun to review these old stories that used to scare me somehow. We went through the motions of checking our old files, taking in all the old memories, and eventually we figured that Gen 1 stuff was just too nostalgic to get rid of. I restarted Gold, he restarted Silver. Immediately he snatched the Game Shark out of the box and slipped it in the back of his Game Boy Advanced. I just shook my head at him. I remember what I said to him. That thing'll kill your game, you know. He never had liked me preaching to him about quote-unquote abusing pixels. I shut my mouth after that, but it had put him off from playing with me. I guess it was just one time too many or something. I ought to know how to keep my thoughts to myself, really. It was a couple of days later that it happened. I was out on the porch, Game Boy in hand, about to go into the Elite Four when I realized I needed a little help. My team was ill-balanced thanks to me playing through for leisure, and at the time, I was no great trainer that could pull off gimmick runs. I knew that my brother had been 2 badges ahead of me when we'd last checked in with one another, so I was hoping maybe he'd let me borrow a Pokemon or two just for this run-through. Now, I don't know about you, but I always got through the Elite Four just by over-leveling my Pokemon. It took forever, but it always worked. Now, the thing is that I'd spent the last 24 hours at a friend's place. I'd literally come home, dumped my bag in my room, and crept out into the sun with my Game Boy Advance to play. I had no idea what he'd been up to. For all I knew, he was done with the game and onto a new one, which I figured was all the better for me since he wouldn't need those Pokemon and I'd stand a better chance of nicking a few. So I got up and went into the house. And when I was crossing the living room, I noticed all of his Pokemon games lying on the floor. Some of the cartridges had been mangled, like they'd been hacked at with something sharp. Even his old blue version, long ago dead and too sentimental to throw away, was lying, the plastic cut ragged, split almost halfway up one side. Completely unusable anymore, even if it would have worked. I was a little scared. This had to have happened this morning. Otherwise, a mom would have seen, and they wouldn't be lying on the carpet. Tucking my Game Boy Advance into my pocket, I crept over to his room and found the door unlocked. Somehow, that was even more concerning. I walked in and found my brother sitting on the edge of his bed. His Game Boy Advance was in pieces on the floor at his feet, smashed to bits. Next to him on the bed were a hammer and our mother's gardening scissors. His face paler than I'd ever seen it, even whiter than the time we'd gone corning and the old guy up the street, legally blind and a raving nutcase, had come and chased us into the trees with a shotgun. Merg. It was now that I also noticed the Game Shark on the ground and a silver cartridge corner poking from under his bed. Somehow they had been spared the wrath of the hammer. "Are you okay?" I asked. I remember the chills that ran through me. He was my little brother. Seeing him like this was horrifying. It was awful. I remember him rasping. The way his voice rattled made my knees weak. Oh God. White everywhere, and then black. I remember running over and hugging him, and I remember his limp arm fell and brushed the Game Boy in my pocket, and his sudden scream, right in my ear, making me jump and bite my tongue by accident. He ripped the handheld from my pocket and hurled it at a far wall. I cried out at the dent the plastic system had made there, running over to collect it. The screen had gone dark, and though I feared the worst, I flicked the switch and it powered up normally. I waited there in the corner, trying to pretend the Game Boy Advance mattered enough not to go and run for our mom. The volume was on. The Pokemon theme started up, and he screamed again, picking up the hammer. This time, I screamed too and ran for the room with my Game Boy Advance clutched to my chest like a shield. He ended up in the psych ward for the hospital for 2 days. When we went to visit him, I left my Game Boy Advance at home. No one could figure out what had set off his strange manic behavior. There was some talk that I didn't understand at the time about some kind of disorder he may or may not have had. But even though Mom and I had collected and brought in all of the cut-up cartridges to be looked at, Mom's idea, not mine, no one had even thought to tie it back to the game. Maybe that was my fault. How could that have been your fault? You didn't know. I hadn't said a word about what had happened when he had accidentally touched my Game Boy or the blind white terror he had been thrown into when the music started. On my last visit to the hospital before school on the second day, I was left alone in the room while Mom had some private talk with the doctor about precautions to take should this happen again. I sat in a chair next to the bed where he was staring at the ceiling. But then suddenly he sat up, making me flinch. "Hey," he told me, "Angie, go in my room when you get home." I didn't understand what he meant, then I remembered the things we hadn't packed up and brought in. The game and the hacking tool under his bed. "Get rid of them. I don't ever want to play with them ever again." His voice was so weary and desperate. He sounded like an old man on his deathbed. Oh, should I have read it like this? "Get rid of them! I don't ever want to play with them again!" He's my poor, damaged little brother. How could I refuse? "Promise you'll get rid of them." "Okay, I promise." I was carted off to school late, and through the whole day, I only had my promise to him in my head. I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the last time that I could ever play the big sister role and help him out. I just had to get home and get rid of that game. But as the day went on, a sick curiosity started to go through my own head. What could possibly have happened to that game that scared him so badly? I was scared myself, but I just had to know. I had to. I got home and went right into his room, bent on uncovering whatever horror was waiting for me. Mom had since vacuumed the room and the cartridge and Game Shark were no longer visible. I got down and crawled half under the bed, feeling timid but holding on to the promise I made as my badge of courage. Under the bed, there was enough dust to make me cough. Enough old Legos and various other toys that I couldn't set my elbow down without it landing on something. But I finally saw both objects. Also, who keeps their Legos under the bed? You keep them on the shelf, because you want to display your creations proudly. They'd been shoved into the corner, on top of a notebook that looked too new to have been here long. Unthinking, I grabbed the corner of the paper and dragged everything out with me, still wheezing from the dust, allergies and all. They looked so innocent, simple toys and a simple spiral-bound bunch of papers. When I set Silver Version and the Game Shark on the floor, I took a closer look at the notebook. On it were scrawled at least 20 different cheat codes, but one had been scratched out with a Sharpie over where it had initially been drawn in with pen. That was confusing. Had he really tried to erase it out? The marker had been pressed to the paper so hard the ink soaked through most of the pages behind it, almost 2/3 of the way to the cardstock back cover. But pen has a way of sticking around, and I picked up the notebook and tilted it backwards in the light, and the reflective surface of the Sharpie revealed the indents that had been left where he'd written. The code was an unintelligible mass of numbers and letters, but the words next to it confused me. Easter egg, snow on Mount Silver. There's the title drop. Also, unless you're literally just hammering it in to the point where you're going to ruin the tip of the permanent marker, the ink is not going to soak. It's going to soak through, but it's not going to soak through that far into a notebook. I remember what he had said when I found him. Had he been raving about white then black? Could he mean snow? Even though it was only August and the temperatures were still climbing to 90 degrees every day. Oh my gosh, I totally relate to that. That's how this year's been. A chill ran down my spine. Did I dare? I picked everything up and brought it to my room and laid it out on the carpet in front of me with my own Game Boy Advance next to it. For a long time, I just stared down at it. The longer I looked, the more maniacal Lugia's face became on the sticker, like some kind of twisted grin, like it was daring me to find out what happened to my brother. I was a 14-year-old kid. Did I really want to tempt fate and risk ending up like him? I glared down at Lugia for a while longer. I had to see. I slid gold out of my Game Boy Advance and stuck silver in its place. It took me almost 15 minutes to compose myself and turn it on. It started up normally. I left the sound on low, too afraid of what I might hear to keep it up the full way, and too curious to turn it the whole way off. The dial screen was normal, too. Lugia again, but somehow menacing despite my common sense telling me it was exactly the same picture as every other time I had started up the game. At least this one acknowledges that it could be their mind playing tricks on them. Because a lot of game creepypastas tend to be very, almost immediately menacing. How bad could this be? I asked myself. His note said Easter egg. Didn't that mean that the coding was already in the game? The menu came up, still absolutely normal. His character was Blake, with a mostly filled Pokedex, but the time was odd. 999:99. I knew he couldn't have been playing for that long. I had barely logged 50 hours on my own game, and I was at the Elite Four. By the way, if anyone wants to calculate how long it would take to play 999 hours of a game in 99 minutes, please let me know. Like, if you're just playing straight, would that be like days, months? Actually, let's do the math. Okay, let's see here.
99.99 divided by 24. It would take you about 41 days. That'd take you maybe a month and a half if you were playing without sleep, or food, or breaking for any reason. Alrighty, and I was playing slowly. Probably the result of his hacking fucking up his mind, I thought. Well, whatever then. The game started up, and the first thing I noticed was the prolonged black screen. It took almost a minute for anything to change, and there was no sound at all. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up already, but it was too late to turn back. Finally, a very dim sort of map came onto the screen, but it looked like static. What was going on? I squinted down and realized with a fearsome pang that it was actually the Mount Silver map. But what I thought was static was heavily falling snow. So this was where he had last saved his game. I checked his party, a very normal team for someone who'd been using a Game Shark. Typhlosion, Ralligator, Meganium, Pidgeot, Tyranitar, Lugia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All level 100 with modded moves. Typical for him. Okay, it's not that far-fetched to get things to level 100, trust me. When I was playing Pokemon Black version, I got so many of my Pokemon to level 100 just by spamming the Elite Four. Something about the sprites was strange, though. They seemed sullen, in a way. Their colors seemed washed out, and their expressions lacked the usual vigor they normally had. I chalked this up to missing pixels or something, also due to hacking. The map had brightened up just a smidgen when I closed out of the start. Indeed, snow was somehow falling very heavily. Pixels danced across the screen so fast it was hard to see the little sprite that was my brother's character. Something was off about him, too. When I checked the information, it was the same as the Pokemon sprites. The colors were dull. In fact, now that I thought about it, he looked almost frostbitten. My stomach tightened as I turned and tried to move back down the mountain. As I hit the bottom of the screen, words popped up, and there was finally a sound. My sprite hitting an invisible wall. I can't turn back now.
That was unsettling. I went into my Pokemon and tried to use Pidgeot's Fly ability. I can't fly in this. Obviously referring to the snow. Fuck this, I thought, going into his bag. There was an escape rope. I tried using it.
I can't go back anymore.
What was going on? Once again, I tried to walk back down. And to my horror, the words changed with every attempt.
I can't run away. I can't go back down. I can never go back.
Wow, timing on the music, that was perfect. This last one sent a frigid feeling through my heart. Almost as if you were frostbitten. There was no way down the mountain. I had to climb. Turning the little sprite around, I moved him forward. No resistance at all, though my walking speed was oddly slow. What was truly weird was the lack of grass, of trainers, of anything at all but that white snow, which still blew across the screen and made it almost impossible to see. As I moved further up the mountain, his walking speed became slower and slower. The static curtain of pixels grew thicker, so that I could barely make out the features of the map. But it seemed like the only way to move was straight ahead anyway. I reached what looked like a set of stairs at the very top edge of the screen. I didn't remember this being there before as I tried to move up. The little sprite paused.
I'm cold.
By now, even I was getting goosebumps. His walking speed had become painfully slow, as if he was being impeded. Up the little staircase. More text on the screen.
Meganium has died.
What the fuck? I thought. Pokemon don't die in these games. That doesn't... I'll admit, whenever I see this line, it doesn't really have the punch it used to. When I was reading these as a teenager, the Pokemon had died things had a... kind of a punch to it, but... it's kind of a cliche when it comes to these games. I checked my party, and was frightened and confused by what I saw. Meganium's sprite had been replaced by a red X. All of my other Pokemon sported varying degrees of damage, though I hadn't battled once. I went into my bag and found a single revive, and tried to use it.
It's too late.
It said. What kind of Easter egg was this? There wasn't much else I could do. Trying to turn around yielded the same message as before, so I kept moving.
Vtuber has died.
I checked again. Sure enough, there was a little red X. This time, I selected it and looked at the Pokemon itself, trying to figure out what was wrong. I wished I hadn't. The sprite was mangled. Pieces of it were missing. What was left was splotched with a sicklish blue-gray color, and its eye was a solid black pit. I flipped down to Meganium. Same deal. A leg missing, a chunk of its neck, most of its head save that pitch-black dead eye. Morbid curiosity urged me onward, and the path never deviated from the straight upward road I'd traveled the entire time. Along the way, every now and again, another Pokemon would die. An examination of its sprite would show that it was in the same condition as the others, until all that was left was Typhlosion. One more staircase was up ahead. I climbed it and braced for whatever horror awaited me. I hit the summit. It was deserted. Red was nowhere to be found. The snow had stopped falling. In the very center of the map was something sticking out of the snow. It looked like a Pokeball. Okay, maybe with all this creepy shit led up to some dramatic final battle using whatever was in there. If I picked it up, maybe Red would come out of hiding. I walked over and examined it. There was a burst of static noise from my game that made me jump. Considering the sort of game this is, that would be kind of unsettling, but then again, any sort of error in that game would usually lead to some sort of garbled noise that would be very unsettling, so that one's not the most unusual. What appeared on the screen was a battle animation. My trainer sprite appeared, his skin tinged blue, against another mangled Pokemon sprite. It was Celebi. In the center of that black hole was its eye, a single red dot burned out like an ember. The thing looked rotted. I didn't even throw out my mostly dead Typhlosion before it had moved.
Celebi used Perish Soul.
A screech came out of my Game Boy Advance, and I almost dropped it as the screen went white. Part of me was relieved, thinking that my final Pokemon had been knocked out, and I would be transported to a Pokemon Center, but I was wrong. My sprite reappeared in what looked like a cave. Was I now inside the mountain? I checked my trainer card and felt sick. The sprite was just as mauled as the Pokemon had been. A leg gone, a single eye remaining, pitch black, and so sad looking. Tears welled up at the corner, and every color on him was replaced with those 6 shades of frosty blue and gray. Every stat on the card was reduced to 0, except the time, which still read 999 hours 99 minutes. I quickly moved back to the map. His sprite there mimicked the horror it had become on the trainer card. Pieces were missing. Everything was discolored. I started trying to walk, and at first I received a message.
So cold.
There was only one direction to go, upward. I moved on, and every now and then would be stopped by a message that made my heart sink lower.
Mother, it feels so cold. I can't go on.
The walls as I walked became darker and darker until they were pitch black at the end. There was an exit there, marked only by a white outline. I had no other choice but to go through it. It opened into a chamber that was also solid white. The only way to distinguish the walls was a thin gray line that marked them as separate from the floor. Against the far wall there was another sprite. Red sprite, intact. I'd come this far. I had to finish this. I walked right up to him and hit A. Ellipsis. A battle started. Red sprite had none of the deformities that marred my own. I'm gonna get a drink real fast. The colors were the same blues and grays, but he was intact. He just looked extremely sad. His first Pokemon came out, Venusaur. It was just like my own had been, but level 0, with a speck of health. I sent out Typhlosion, who had just 6 hit points left. No Pokemon made a sound when they were brought into battle.
Venusaur, you struggle.
There was no animation, just a single point of damage done to Typhlosion, and then the opposite sprite dropping off the screen.
Venusaur has died.
There was no text asking me to switch out. Instead, there was just what I took to be dialogue from Red, which was ellipsis. His next Pokemon was Blastoise, even more mangled than Venusaur had been. It too struggled and died. After each round there was the opposite
Dot.
from their trainer. Every sprite was more damaged than the last. His Espeon was barely distinguishable as a Pokemon. I realized somewhere that he was sending them out all out of order, saved one Pokemon for last. Pikachu came out, and it was grotesque. It too was discolored like it was frostbitten. It was missing an ear, half its body and tail. Its head was mostly intact, but its eyes were much larger than they should have been, and glared out at me like pitch black windows into hell. But the thing that got me the most was the giant smile that extended almost all the way to the edges of its head. Its health was somehow at 0, or at least looked that way. My hands were shaking. I didn't get the chance to attack.
Pikachu used Pain Split. Pikachu has died. Typhlosion has died.
It cut back to the image of Red Sprite, and now it looked like mine. With his body so butchered, it looked like a carcass stripped of most of its meat. Except it had those same, soulless, deranged eyes as Pikachu. I finally understood what happened. They were dead. They were dead. And the sub-level of the mountain was the hell they now existed. Red finally spoke.
It's over.
The screen flashed black and white for a moment.
Used Destiny Bond.
A horrible, hideous screeching started to issue from my Game Boy Advance. The screen went white and it shrieked at me. I threw it to the floor and pressed my back against the bed. The horrible noise continued for several long moments while the screen stayed white, then went black. Then there was silence. It took me a few long moments, but I eventually stood up. I took the Game Shark, I took the notebook, I took that possessed game. I picked them all up and carried them to the garbage. Into the garbage can we had already set out for morning pickup. At the end of our long winding driveway, and I threw them in. When I got back to the house, I don't know what made me do it, but I picked up the yellow version and inserted it into my Game Boy. I think it was part of me determined to make sure I hadn't somehow ended up tainted as well. The music started up. The game played. I turned to my Pikachu and hit A. Its smiling face greeted me with an ear twitch and a big pixelated smile. A pleasant, normal smile. I turned my game off and spent the next hour crying on the floor. My brother and I never did play Pokemon together again. He gave it up for good. I stuck to playing my comforting, unhacked games. That winter,
The snow fell thick.
alrighty, so I think that for the time I read it, it was a good story. Like, as an adult reading this multiple years later, it does not near have the same punch it did when I read it in, like, I want to say high school. But it was just reading this, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see the things in the writing that I didn't see before. And mind you, I think it's still fairly decent as a story, but at the same time, its premise kind of limits it. That being said, though, reading that does kind of make me want to play a legitimate, like, Pokemon-style horror game. Like, I recall about a year ago seeing these ads for an app that was, like, advertising itself as basically a horror Pokemon game. And, like, I went to go look at it because I was curious, because the ads seemed like, oh, I'd play this. And then I was just like, this is not at all what was advertised. But that's pretty standard of app ads, isn't it? Alright. Our next story is The Legend of Carter Bale. Somehow I managed to not review Homecoming, but this one I reviewed before I decided to put it on the list, so this one actually is a good one. The Roaring Twenties became a different time for all of America as the economy took a massive plummet. The Depression sank about every industry like a stone, and families of every class felt the impact. Throughout the Hoovervilles set up around the river bend, there was one man who seemed prosperous despite it all. A master manipulator with creative ways to collect his debts. Carter Bale was a moonshiner who specialized in his craft. He was a savior to the working man and the devil to the preachers in town, providing some of the finest corn liquor in the area. If he wasn't using his silver tongue to work his way out of a jam, he was never afraid to get his hands dirty when money was involved, and many drunkards knew not to mess around with Carter unless you could pay. Being the entrepreneur he was, Carter had several stills cleverly camouflaged from the law, and at night you could see the wisps of smoke haunting the night sky as he concocted his brew. One day, as Carter was collecting his debts in town, a red-faced woman burst down the dirt road as if fired from a gun. With tears of rage streaming down her face, she screamed for Carter to reveal himself to her. As he walked out into the open, she stormed over to him whilst rearing her hand back and slapped him with all her might. "My boy I'll never see again because of you. He wandered off into the woods last night and came home smelling like an oil lamp," she exclaimed. "Well, ma'am, seems to me like you ought to be watching your youngin' a bit closer. It's a shame he won't get to watch nothing ever again 'cause of you," he yelled as he spit at her feet. "Carter Bale, you may have the rest of these folks fooled round here, but I know you're nothing but a scheming, thief. Your days are numbered selling gut-rot liquor on this earth. You mark my words. She screamed as she reached for his head and ripped out several pieces of hair. Although bewildered, he didn't think much of her actions aside, and thought it to be a woman's scorn. Besides, he had more important matters to attend to. You wouldn't think much of someone literally ripping hair off of your head? Like, that hurts. Later that night, he went into the woods to tend his stills. There were 3 spread out strategically. He would only run 2 at a time and leave one on reserve in case Johnny Law happened to stumble onto one of his hiding spots. A wise businessman will always have a backup plan. As he stoked the flames for the boiler, he thought about the frantic woman. There was a sense of guilt that began to overcome him as the flames began to rise, and he became absent-minded for a moment. A smoldering ember managed to escape from the flames and landed near his ingredients. He snapped back to reality quickly once a second fire began to consume his consumables. Hurriedly, he looked for anything around him to put out the flames, but it was too late. He knew he would be caught for sure as an entire still became engulfed, but as soon as the fire had its fill, it vanquished. Frightened and in disbelief, Carter fell to his knees. He ran his fingers through his hair and felt where his hair had been ripped out, and it dawned on him. "That woman!" he exclaimed. He ran off to his second still and saw that everything was still intact. All his ingredients were there. The flames were stoked. He seemed to be producing as normal. To calm down after his recent trauma, he decided to have a sample of his work. He took a ladle and got a spoonful of shine. As he tipped the ladle into his mouth, however, he saw that there was nothing but black, slimy bile pouring into his mouth. While spitting and screaming in a fit of rage, he paced back and forth, wondering what he was going to do with the taste of bilge water fresh on his tongue. It was already past midnight, and it would take him months to get the materials together to rebuild again and clean the wreckage behind him. He had no choice but to try and make a new batch. When he arrived at his last still, he was still spitting bile from his last sight. The burned and ragged man took out his knife to open the burlap sacks of ingredients that lay before him, but the contents inside made him leap out of his skin. As the blade cut open the first sack, spiders and maggots began to crawl from the hole and work their way up his arm. Swatting them away, he hurriedly backed away and bumped into a small figure. "Hi, Carter," said a female voice under a dark cloak. "It's you!" He screamed while waving his knife. "Stay away from me! I'll gut you!" Now, there's no need for all that," she said as she waved her hand at him, which flung the knife into the wood under sticks and debris. "You know, Carter, I got to thinking about what you said, and my boy not being to watch anything again. It really is a shame." As she said, she began to walk towards him. "A mother's job is always to protect and provide for her son." "Dear God, lady, what are you gonna do to me?" he cried, trembling, with tears in his eye. "I'm gonna give back what you took from me." She shrieked into the night as red began to glow from her eyes. The wind picked up in a howl, and leaves began to swirl in a whirlwind, creating a vortex so loud that the whole town grew deaf for a moment. And then there was silence. In the moonlight, there was stillness so peaceful that even a church mouse couldn't be bothered. The following day, Carter Bale was nowhere to be found. They checked his shack, the woods, and even some of his debtors, and no one had seen or heard from him. Rumor had it that he decided to skip town on a train car headed south to try his hand at flavoring his moonshine. But before long, he became a distant memory soon to be forgotten by many. There was, however, a little boy who miraculously gained his sight after going blind. He lived a happy and normal life, as most little boys do, but when his mother was asked about her thoughts on the miracle, she stated that it was nothing short of an answer to prayer, just as if he had received a brand new set of eyes. Alrighty. I honestly think this one's good. It reads more like, well, I mean, based on the title, I guess that works. It reads like an old legend. Like an old story that someone might tell around a campfire rather than an internet horror story. And I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not like an actual like legend, but I like how this one reads. Alright, next one is Her Silence. Written by Kat Crane. Again, this is one I've read. So, I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a go. Her Silence. He turns the steering wheel in different directions, taking different roads when he needs to. He needs to go through the woods to get to his destination. He's confused, but not about that. What confuses him is why his sister is being so silent as she sits in the back seat. The time is currently 6:36. I'm gonna guess PM, but it doesn't say. And he just picked up Emily from her friend Julia's house. He was thankful he didn't have to get out of the car and knock on the door, as she was already standing out in the yard, waiting for him. He tried to make conversation with her. How'd it go at Julia's? Did you have fun? Has the rabbit gotten better? But everything he said was met with silence. It weirds him out, and he grows slightly concerned. Is she okay? But an uncomfortable knot forms in his stomach when he glances in the rearview mirror and sees her staring at him. Or more specifically, the side of his neck with what looks like hunger in her eyes. Are you alright, Em? She doesn't reply. He looks back again when he hears an odd sound coming from her mouth and sees her licking her lips. What are you doing? No answer. He lets out a shaky sigh before reaching and turning the radio on to put some music in the car and distract him from the situation. Eventually, they pull up in the driveway and he stops the car, unbuckling and opening his door. He looks back and she's still sitting there, unmoving, but her eyes follow him. Come on, Emily. You can't stay out here. What are you doing? Nothing. Seriously, what has gotten into you? You haven't said a word. No sound leaves her mouth as she unbuckles, opens the door, and steps out of the car. He runs his hands through his hair in slight confusion and relief before reaching back in the car and grabbing his phone out from one of the little slots beside the cup holder. He presses the button, and as he closes the door and heads towards the front door of the house, his sister falling behind.
Missed calls and 12 unread messages from Emily.
What? He mutters, confusion lacing his voice. Why was she texting me? He thinks, when was she texting me? The time now reads 7:13. He feels uneasy, like something's not quite right, but he doesn't know what exactly. Pulling out the keys and sticking it into the hole in the knob, he opens the door and walks inside. When he looks behind him, Emily isn't there. Emily? He raises an eyebrow as he turns to look for her. Em? He suddenly sees an Emily-shaped shadow walk into the yard. He follows. What are you doing? You know you're... But he stops. Nobody's there. The feeling of dread hits him in the chest as he looks out into the dark woods beside his house. He sees a figure standing just behind the outline of the trees. It's short, with long hair, just like Emily. This isn't right. Has she lost her mind? Maybe it's him that's losing his mind. Chills run up his spine as he walks closer to her. Emily, what are you doing? She turns and runs out of sight. This doesn't make any sense. She's usually terrified of the woods, especially at night. There's no way she'd go in there unless something was wrong. Without thinking, he takes off through the trees. He doesn't know what's going on, but he isn't going to let Emily get herself into danger. He turns the flashlight in his phone on, as he pushes past all the weeds in his way and avoids tripping over anything. "Emily," he calls. "Come out right now!" His head turns when he hears a twig snap. "Come on, Emily. If this is some kind of prank, it's not funny." The tension rises beneath him, as complete silence fills his ears. Oh no, is it a bear? Or a panther? He shines the flashlight in every direction to see something, anything. He can feel his breathing quicken. Is Emily okay? Snap! Another twig. No. He's not going to leave her out here alone. He's going to find her, even if he dies trying. He feels his phone buzz against his palm. He looks at the screen. Another text from Emily. He lets out a relieved breath. At least she's still alive. He opens his messages and reads over what she said before letting out a confused and fearful gasp. Crack! This time it's the leaves, and it comes from directly behind him. His hand shakes as he slowly turns around and lays eyes on her. A low growl. A scream. Silence. His phone buzzes from the ground. 6:34.
Dude, what happened? Are you picking me up? 6:36. Mike, answer me. 6:37. What are you doing? 6:41. Idiot. Reply, please. 6:43. Mike? 6:50. Mike! 7:02. Mom isn't answering either. 7:05. Somebody please reply. 7:11. Come on. 7:14. I can't stay at Julia's forever. 7:16. Are you alive, Mike? 7:20. Talk to me. 7:34. I'm coming.
Ooh, this one had a nice little bit of Skinwalker/vampire fare to it. It looked like Emily. It was in the woods. It didn't talk. I'm assuming this has something to do with the Appalachian area. That one was overall just very, very well executed. Like, I can actually tell you, the forest at night is a very, very scary place to be. I spent some time in Florida in a city that was like right next to really, really big thickets that, while not part of Everglades National Park, were part of the Everglades. And there were no streetlights. Trying to go anywhere was terrifying. The only light was the light of the headlights. Yeah, it's very much an unsettling experience. Kind of the same thing as driving through the mountains, actually, at night, too. Along a highway, you can't see anything past your headlights, and it's just unsettling. It's like the world only exists with your car and what's in your headlights. Alrighty. Which one of these do I want to finish up on? Because I think we only have time for maybe one more. Let's do the Strange Village. Seems like a good one to end up. As good a one to end up on as many. So, let's do it. The Strange Village, written by Akuma. And I know this one sort of takes place in Japan, so please forgive any mispronunciations. I myself am not Japanese nor familiar with the language. I will do my best, but I will acknowledge I may mispronounce some things. Mayuko's Game Boy suddenly turned off. She rolled her eyes and let out a loud sigh. The stupid thing ran out of batteries again. Mayuko shoved it inside her backpack and looked around. Surprisingly enough, the wagon was completely empty aside from herself. Usually the train would be full of exhausted businessmen, annoying teenagers, and girls like Mayuko. Girls going home after a tiring day at school. Some reading books, others chatting with their best friend. But this time there was no one else but Mayuko at the wagon. The train was silent, and Mayuko could hear her own breath. Something felt wrong. The air was eerily still. She looked out the window, trying to shake the strange feeling off. Her eyes widened as she realized it was already dark outside. How much time had passed already? Mayuko was desperate. What would her mother think? Where was the train going? Mayuko sat on the ground, tears filling and rolling down her face. She was just 13 years old. Nothing like that had ever happened to her. She shut her eyes, expecting someone to come and help her. And suddenly, the train stopped. Mayuko opened her eyes and looked around, and found she was surrounded by darkness. She was frozen in place, shaking and crying, thinking about what she was supposed to do next. Slowly, she got up and looked out the window. The train stopped. The train stopped somewhere she'd never been before. Trees surrounding everything she could see, except for a small path between two large rocks. Right behind the trees, Mayuko could see what happened to be a small village. Mayuko looked around and realized the train's door had opened. She thought about it and decided that maybe someone in the village could help her get back home. Mayuko left the train. She stopped in front of the dirt path and inspected the two large rocks around it. They had something written on them. Welcome to... The village's name was covered by moss. The second rock said, "To utter the final word, I'll only say then without saying. Nothing more. Nothing more." Moss was also covering part of the text. Mayuko frowned, confused. Was that an old poem or something? She didn't know, and she didn't really care. Without any more hesitation, she walked towards the village. At the end of the dirt path, there it was. The seemingly old village adorned with lanterns all around. The first thing Mayuko noticed was that there was absolutely no one out on the streets. Was everyone inside their houses? Why? Mayuko didn't want to believe the place was abandoned. She insisted on calling for help. Carefully, she walked over to the first house she saw. As she gets closer to the shoji, Japanese sliding door, a strong smell reached her nose. It came from inside the house. Mayuko ignored it and knocked softly on the shoji. "Hello? Is anyone there?" asked Mayuko. She waited. Nothing. She knocked again. "Could anyone please help me? I'm lost." Mayuko waited eagerly for an answer, but no one came. Assuming no one was home, she moved on to the next house. Once again, she knocked on the shoji and called out to the house's owner. And once again, no one came. No way, Mayuko muttered to herself, as she was finally convinced that the village was abandoned. Just as she was about to lose all hope, Mayuko realized the shoji was open all along. Not fully open, just a small gap. Mayuko held her breath as she slid the shoji open. The same smell from before came back. It was pitch black inside the house. Mayuko had to adjust her eyes to the darkness. The floor and walls were soaked with black paint? Whatever it was definitely the source of the smell. Mayuko carefully touched it with her fingers. It wasn't paint. It was thick, warm, and sticky. Mayuko cleaned her finger on the trim of her skirt and went back outside. Somehow, the sky seemed even darker than before. And just then, she noticed something behind the trees. A torii, Japanese gate. It was almost unnoticeable at first sight, but the red paint gave it away. Slowly, she walked closer to it. Behind it, there was an enormous staircase that seemed almost endless. But Mayuko's curiosity got the best of her, so she made her way up. As expected, the stairs led to a shrine, but there was something different about it. It had an eerie atmosphere. Mayuko was suddenly filled with dread. There was something definitely wrong with it. As Mayoko got closer, the feeling of dread grew stronger. With every step, Miyuko's heart pounded faster and faster. She felt as if there was someone watching her. Mayuko opened the shrine's door. The same goddamn smell was now even worse. Mayuko suppressed the urge to puke. The walls and floor were completely covered with the black substance. Not even one corner left out. Right in the middle of the room was a jar, a plain porcelain jar about the size of Mayuko's arm. For some reason, Mayuko felt out of herself, as if she had no control of her body. Her head was spinning. She could barely stand up, but she somehow managed to reach the jar and open its lid. And, as if it was magic, she came back to her senses. She backed away and stared at the jar, eyes widened. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Until the jar started to shake and move around, as if it were alive. Mayuko couldn't believe what was happening. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to cooperate. She screamed when an arm came out of the jar, an unnaturally long arm, also covered with the black substance. Its hand had sharp claws, which scraped and scratched the ground like a knife. Then another arm appeared, followed by its head, its face hidden behind a dirty porcelain doll mask. Mayuko then realized what she had done. That thing was a demon. She had no doubts about that. Someone had sealed the creature inside the jar after it destroyed the village, but now it was finally free. In the blink of an eye, the demon was completely out of the jar. It was impossibly tall, and its limbs were twisted and contorted in inhuman ways. Mayuko stared at the creature, and the creature stared at her. Carefully, Mayuko tried to leave the shrine. She was almost outside, but the demon suddenly started to walk towards her. Mayuko screamed, turned around, and ran. Everything around her was a blur. She could hear the demon running right behind her, and getting closer and closer. While running down the staircase that led back to the village, Mayuko tripped and twisted her ankle. She screamed in pain as she fell down, crying out loud. Just then, she felt something grab her arm. The demon had got up to her, and its sharp claws were slowly dragging themselves across Mayuko's skin. But she wasn't giving up. Gathering all the courage she had left, Mayuko got up and kept on running, releasing herself from the demon's hand. The staircase felt endless, but eventually Mayuko was back at the village. The demon, realizing its victim was about to escape, desperately tried to reach out for her, but Mayuko was faster. She ran through the dirt path and was surprised to see the train was still there, as if it was waiting for her to come back. Mayuko hopped on the train and looked out the window. The demon wasn't anywhere to be seen. She sighed with relief and cried for what seemed like hours, perhaps because of the throbbing pain in her right arm, or maybe out of disbelief for what had just happened. Then, she heard a loud thud. The demon was trying to enter the train, but the doors were way too small for him to pass through. Even though he wore a mask, Mayuko could see the anger in his expression, his body twitching with rage. Mayuko bravely got to her feet and approached the demon. As soon as she got close, it made a futile attempt to grab her. Without thinking twice, Mayuko screamed and pushed the creature out of the train. Its body was thin, so it didn't take long for the demon to fall to the ground. As the demon was about to make one more attempt at grabbing Mayuko, the train's lights suddenly turned back on and the doors closed. As the locomotive began to move, Mayuko could still hear the creature banging desperately on the door, attempting to open it. Mayuko fell down to the ground, exhausted. It was finally over. Her breath was unstable, her eyes still wide from the fear. She stayed there until the train's door opened again, revealing a familiar station in front of her. She was home. With her backpack in her hand, she left the train. As she walked through the streets, people looked at her and whispered to one another, wondering what had happened to her. It took a while for Mayuko to come up with an excuse for her injuries. She just told her mother that a classmate beat her up at school, and she believed it. There was no way Mayuko would tell her what really happened. She wouldn't believe it anyway. That night, Mayuko had trouble sleeping. A week later, Mayuko went to the doctor with her mother. They took a train to get to the clinic, and immediately Mayuko felt a chill down her spine. All of the memories from the previous week came flooding back, but she ignored them. Mayuko looked out the window, admiring the landscape the train passed by, and suddenly she started to recognize her surroundings. She felt her heart drop. This was a place where the dirt path was supposed to be. But there was no path to be found. Only 2 broken down rocks. Alrighty. That, I think, is going to be the last story we read this evening. And I am going to place myself back at the center here. Alright, I hope you all enjoyed our little adventure with horror stories in celebration of this Halloween. As for why we were doing this, it's because I know that I won't have the time to be able to actually stream on Halloween, the actual day. Otherwise, I'd do it then. So, as for announcements, next week we will be playing we'll be playing Dark Souls, and we'll be collabing with Lucas Sorian again, as we'll be continuing the rotation where we left off last time. And, as usual, streams will be resuming Fridays at 6 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So, I will, as usual, post my schedule on Twitch so that you can figure out where that is in your personal time zone. In the meantime, I think we will raid Little Nikto, because it looks like he is streaming. Let me set that up. Raid. Although I will admit, I did not care for how much swearing some of these have. Like, I know people swear, but some of these I just look at this, and even under extreme duress, I've never known someone personally to swear as much as some of the people in these stories. But then again, that might just be me and my personal experiences. So, anyway, I hope you all had a good time this week with our stream, and I will see you all next week where we will be resuming the usual rotation, and that reminds me, I should be posting polls for what will be replacing the games for this fall rotation for the winter. I have already determined what my personal pick is going to be. I am going to be playing Baldur's Gate 3 as the first game of the rotation, and it will be replacing, what was it? It will be replacing Shadows over Loathing. I would have said Little Nightmares until I remembered, oh yeah, I beat that one. Anyway, I have the raid set up to go to Little Nikto. I hope you all have a good evening.